There is a plant in the mint family that the United States government still lists as an approved food flavoring. You can find the regulation yourself. It sits in the Federal Code under Title 21, Section 172.510, right alongside peppermint and spearmint and all the other mints you already know. The plant looks like mint. It smells like mint. For over 2,000 years, people brewed it into tea to calm upset stomachs, clear stuffy noses, and keep fleas off their dogs. That was in 421 BCE. That was in 1st century Rome. That was in colonial Virginia kitchens and in Iroquois villages along the Great Lakes. And 1 tablespoon of its concentrated oil can shut down your liver, put you in a coma, and kill you. There is no antidote. The plant is called pennyroyal. And the distance between the gentle herbal tea your great-grandmother might have sipped and the bottle of essential oil that has ended lives is a lot smaller than you would think. But this story doesn't start with the poison. It starts with the cure. Go back about 2,400 years. Athens, Greece. A playwright named Aristophanes is staging a comedy called Peace. It is 421 BCE. The Peloponnesian War is dragging on, and Athenians are tired and looking for reasons to laugh. In one scene, the god Hermes hands a female companion to a character named Trigaios. Trigaios, being the practical type, asks what happens if she gets pregnant. And Hermes basically tells him not to worry about it, just give her some pennyroyal. The audience laughed. They got it immediately. That casual reference tells you everything you need to know about pennyroyal's place in ancient Greek life. It was not exotic. It was not hidden behind a pharmacist's counter. It was common enough, trusted enough, and familiar enough that a comedian could drop it as a one-liner, and every person sitting in those stone theater seats knew exactly what he was talking about. The plant was everywhere, creeping low along stream banks and wet meadows across the Mediterranean, filling the air with this sharp, clean, minty scent whenever you crushed a leaf between your fingers. Greek physicians were writing pennyroyal into their medical texts around the same era, and not as some specialty ingredient reserved for difficult cases. It was a standard remedy. Stomach cramps? Drink pennyroyal tea. A cough that will not quit? Try pennyroyal in warm water. Late period? Steep the leaves stronger. The physician Galen listed it as an emmenagogue, a substance used to stimulate menstrual flow. So did another physician named Oribasius. A gynecology text sometimes misattributed to Cleopatra, but actually written by a Greek female physician named Metrodora, recommended pennyroyal mixed with wine. The ancient world had landed on a consensus about this plant, and the consensus was straightforward. Pennyroyal worked, pennyroyal was safe, and pennyroyal belonged in every household. Then the Romans picked it up and ran with it. Pliny the Elder, the great Roman naturalist who spent his career cataloguing essentially everything in the known world, wrote about pennyroyal in his massive encyclopedia called Naturalis Historia sometime in the 1st century. He described its medicinal properties in detail, listing decoctions of the herb with wine for use as a diuretic, mixed with vinegar and polenta as a remedy for constipation and vomiting, and blended with water to stop nausea and stomach aches. He also noted something the Greeks had already figured out. The plant was astonishingly good at driving away fleas. In fact, Pliny is the reason we call it what we call it. The Latin name for the plant, Pulegium, comes from the word pulex, which means flea. That Latin root eventually twisted through Anglo-Norman French, where Pulegium became Puleol, and someone tacked the word royal onto the end, giving it the old herbalist name Puleol royal. Over a few centuries of garbled pronunciation, that became pennyroyal. So the very name of this plant is a monument to its oldest job, keeping fleas off people and animals. A flea mint, a royal flea herb. That is literally what the word means. Country people in England had their own names for it too. They called it run by the ground because of the way it crept low across the dirt, and lurk in the ditch because it loved the wet margins of footpaths and drainage channels. In the countryside, it was the plant you stepped on without noticing and immediately smelled. But here's the detail that everyone missed at the time. Every single physician writing about pennyroyal, from Galen to Metrodora to Pliny himself, described what the plant did to the body without ever connecting those effects to a danger living inside the chemistry of the leaves. They could observe that pennyroyal relieved stomach cramps and stimulated menstruation and repelled insects. They could not observe why it did those things, or what else it might be doing while it was at them. And that gap between what the plant did and what the plant actually was would stay open for roughly 2,000 years. For a while, things seemed fine. Pennyroyal just kept being pennyroyal, century after century, culture after culture. The tea was gentle. The dried bundles that hung in kitchens smelled pleasant and kept insects out of the pantry. Nobody had much reason to question a plant that had been quietly solving minor household problems since before the Roman Empire fell. That didn't last. When European colonists crossed the Atlantic in the 1600s and started building settlements along the eastern coast of North America, they brought pennyroyal with them. Seeds and rootstock traveled in the holds of ships alongside rosemary, sage, and feverfew. All the herbs a colonial household needed to keep itself fed, healthy, and more or less free of pests. European pennyroyal, Mentha pulegium, the creeping variety with small purple flowers, took root in American soil and started spreading through wet meadows and along stream banks, behaving the way it had always behaved in Europe. In these colonial dooryard gardens, pennyroyal had a specific job. It was the plant you counted on when your child had a stomachache, and the nearest doctor was a full day's ride away. You dried the leaves in autumn, bundled them, stored them in the pantry, and brewed them into tea when winter brought the coughs and fevers that always came. The dried herb went into sachets that you laid between folded linens to keep moths away. You scattered leaves on the floor the way your mother had done in England, letting foot traffic crush them and release the oil that drove fleas out of the house. It was not glamorous, it was practical. And for a household that could not afford to waste a single plant in the garden, pennyroyal earned its place by doing half a dozen small jobs reliably. But the colonists did not introduce pennyroyal to America. They introduced their version of it. There was already a pennyroyal growing wild across the eastern half of the continent. A different species entirely. Hedeoma pulegioides, American pennyroyal, it grew upright instead of creeping. Its leaves were smaller and arranged differently on the stem. It thrived in limestone-rich soil and sunny woodland clearings from Ontario down to the Carolinas. Some people called it squaw mint. Others called it mosquito plant or tickweed or stinking balm. Same family, same general idea, different plant. Native American tribes had been using it long before any European ship appeared on the horizon. The Iroquois brewed it for digestive problems. The Ojibwe used it for menstrual cramps and stomach distress. Eastern woodland tribes, across a huge stretch of territory, crushed the leaves and rubbed them on skin to repel mosquitoes, gnats, and biting flies. It was carried in medicine bundles, alongside boneset and wild black cherry and hops, standard treatments for everyday pain and fever and stomach trouble. The naturalist William Bartram, who traveled through the American Southeast in the 1790s, noted pennyroyal teas brewed by settlers who had clearly learned the practice from their indigenous neighbors. So by the 1700s, you had two different pennyroyals growing across North America, European and American, both members of the mint family, both used for the same basic purposes, both trusted by the communities that grew them and gathered them and brewed them into tea. Colonial women kept pennyroyal in their dooryard gardens right next to the basil, the sage, and the feverfew. It was a strewing herb, meaning people scattered the dried leaves on floors to freshen rooms and discourage pests. It flavored puddings. It went into dishes with green peas. It showed up in homemade insect repellents. I mean, think about that for a second. This was not some rare plant locked away in an apothecary's back room. This was a kitchen herb, a garden staple, something children walked past every single day without anyone giving it a second thought. And that is where the story needs to shift. Because the chemistry hiding inside those ordinary-looking leaves is where everything changes. Every mint family plant produces what is called a volatile oil. That oil is what gives peppermint its cool sting and spearmint its sweetness. It is the thing you smell when you tear a mint leaf in half. In Pennyroyal, the dominant compound in that volatile oil is a molecule called Pulegone, and the concentration of Pulegone in Pennyroyal is nothing like what you find in the other mints sitting in your kitchen. Peppermint oil, the stuff in your toothpaste, contains somewhere between 0.5% and about 5% Pulegone. It is a trace player, a minor background note in a complex bouquet of other compounds. European Pennyroyal oil contains 85 to 97% Pulegone. That is not a minor background note. That is the entire orchestra. The American species runs lower, around 30%, but even that is dramatically higher than any mint you would find in a grocery store. Now, when you brew Pennyroyal leaves into a tea the traditional way, the amount of Pulegone that actually ends up in your cup is relatively small. The leaves themselves contain only about 1 to 2% essential oil by weight, and only a fraction of that oil dissolves into the water during steeping. This is the version of Pennyroyal that people used for centuries. The tea, the dried leaves tucked into a pouch, the crushed stems rubbed on exposed skin. At those concentrations, Pennyroyal mostly behaved the way everyone said it did. It eased stomach cramps, it helped with congestion, it repelled bugs, and it did not kill anyone. Think of it this way. Brewing Pennyroyal tea is like smelling a candle from across the room. You get a whiff of the compound. Your body processes it without breaking a sweat. Swallowing Pennyroyal essential oil is like sticking your face directly into the flame. The same chemical, at a concentration hundreds of times higher, delivered directly into the one organ responsible for breaking it down. The essential oil is a completely different substance in every way that matters. When you steam distill Pennyroyal, you strip out the Pulegone and concentrate it into a liquid that is almost pure toxin sitting in a small glass bottle. And when that concentrated Pulegone enters a human body, the liver does what the liver always does. It tries to break the compound down using a family of enzymes called cytochrome P450. Those enzymes convert Pulegone into a metabolite called menthofuran. And menthofuran is where the killing starts. Menthofuran does not just pass through the liver, it binds directly to the proteins inside liver cells, and it destroys them. Cell by cell, the liver starts dying. The damage concentrates there first, but it can spread to the lungs and the kidneys. And here is the part that makes toxicologists particularly uneasy. Anything that speeds up the liver's enzyme activity, things like alcohol consumption or certain medications, actually makes the poisoning worse. The liver converts Pulegone into menthofuran faster. The body's own detoxification process is what generates the toxin that kills its host. The harder the liver works, the faster it dies. And somehow, it gets worse. There is no antidote, no drug that reverses the process once it starts. Once enough Pulegone has entered the bloodstream, and the conversion to menthofuran is underway, the only medical option is supportive care, IV fluids, monitoring, and hoping that the liver can regenerate faster than the menthofuran destroys it. The European Medicines Agency reviewed the available data and found that moderate to severe liver damage appeared in cases involving at least 10 milliliters of Pennyroyal oil. That is less than a single tablespoon. According to the National Institutes of Health, as little as 15 milliliters, 1 tablespoon, can cause fainting, seizures, coma, cardiovascular collapse, acute liver injury, kidney failure, and death. The kind of number that makes toxicologists stop writing and just underline it. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover forgotten plants, buried food history, and the weird science hiding in your backyard every week. So, 1 tablespoon of oil from a plant that looks like mint and smells like mint and grows right next to mint. What Pennyroyal did to the people who actually trusted it made all of that gentle herbal history look completely different. The medical literature documents at least 24 cases of Pennyroyal toxicity. That number comes from a review published by Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and the list of symptoms reads like a medical textbook's worst-case chapter: liver failure, kidney failure, dangerous drops in blood sugar, blood clotting disorders, gastrointestinal hemorrhage, lung congestion, altered mental status, brain swelling, seizures, and death. These are not dusty cases from the 1800s. These showed up in modern hospitals with modern equipment, and modern medicine still could not fix what Pennyroyal had broken. One early case, described in the British Medical Journal back in the early 1900s, involved a young woman who swallowed about a tablespoon of pennyroyal oil. She collapsed within hours. She died 8 days later. The case that became a landmark in the toxicology literature was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 1996. Researchers at the University of California reported on 4 patients who had ingested pennyroyal. 1 died. In that fatal case, the team performed a post-mortem examination of a blood sample that had been drawn 72 hours after ingestion. They found 18 nanograms of Pulegone per milliliter of serum and 1 nanogram of menthofuran per milliliter. Those are vanishingly small amounts in absolute terms, but they confirmed what the liver damage already made obvious. The body had metabolized the Pulegone into its lethal byproduct, and the process was irreversible by the time anyone knew to intervene. A second patient in the same study survived after being given N-acetylcysteine, the drug used to treat acetaminophen overdose. That detail matters because it tells you something about the mechanism. Acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, destroys the liver through a similar chain of events. The drug gets metabolized into a reactive compound that binds to liver cell proteins and kills them. What the Pennyroyal researchers found suggested that Pulegone's byproduct, menthofuran, attacks the liver in a comparable way. Same basic destruction, different source compound. But N-acetylcysteine is not a specific antidote for pennyroyal poisoning. It is a treatment borrowed from a different poisoning pathway that sometimes helps and sometimes does not. Whether it works depends on how fast it is administered, how much oil the patient consumed, and how much damage the liver has already sustained by the time anyone figures out what is happening. In many documented cases, by the time a patient shows up at the emergency room, the conversion from Pulegone to menthofuran is already well underway, and the window for intervention has narrowed to almost nothing. An 18-year-old girl arrived at an emergency room with abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting. She was agitated but also sleepy, drifting between the two in a way that alarmed the staff. She told the physician she had swallowed 1 ounce of pennyroyal oil approximately 2 hours earlier. She was admitted to the intensive care unit. That case was documented by the American Association of Poison Control Centers, and it is the kind of case that keeps appearing in the literature because the patient's age and the reason she took the oil follow a pattern that the medical community has seen again and again. Then there were the cases that are hardest to read about because the victims were not making choices for themselves. 2 babies, one 8 weeks old and the other 6 months, were brought to hospitals after being given locally prepared mint tea for respiratory illness. The tea had been made with pennyroyal, either because the caregiver mistook it for regular mint or because nobody had ever told them there was a difference. Both infants developed metabolic acidosis, a dangerous shift in blood chemistry, along with seizures and failure of multiple organs. 1 infant died, the other survived with permanent neurological damage. That case was published in the journal Pediatrics in 1996. Laboratory analysis confirmed the tea contained Pulegone. You'd think someone would have said something, not just in the journals, not just in the case reports that sit behind academic paywalls. Someone with authority, someone who could change a regulation. If pennyroyal had stopped here, this would be a very different story. If it were an obscure compound sitting in a research lab, the response would be simple. Classify it, restrict it, move on. But pennyroyal is not a chemical sitting in a lab. It is a living plant that grows wild in meadows and along stream banks and at the edges of parking lots across most of the Northern Hemisphere. And the rules around it are stranger than the chemistry. The FDA lists European pennyroyal oil as an approved food additive for use as a flavoring agent. The listing sits in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, Part 172, Section 510. What that means in practice is that trace amounts of pennyroyal can legally appear in commercially produced foods and beverages in the United States. The listing has been there for decades. Meanwhile, the essential oil is not regulated as a medicine. It carries no standardized dosing guidelines, no required safety labeling, no warning that explains what 1 tablespoon can do. You can order bottles of pennyroyal essential oil from online retailers right now. Some of those bottles list Pulegone content at over 85%. Some are marketed for aromatherapy. Some mention menstrual support or respiratory benefits. Some simply describe the product as a mint family essential oil and leave it at that. The gap between what the regulatory framework allows and what the medical literature documents is enormous. On one side, you have a plant compound listed as an approved food flavoring, treated the same way the government treats lemon extract or vanilla. On the other side, you have at least 24 documented poisoning cases, a known hepatotoxin that destroys liver cells through a mechanism for which no specific antidote exists, and multiple deaths published in peer-reviewed journals across several decades. The lack of formal restriction is especially strange when you compare pennyroyal to other substances the FDA has acted on. Supplements and botanicals have been pulled from shelves for far less documented harm. Ephedra was banned after it was linked to cardiovascular events. Comfrey supplements were removed over liver toxicity concerns. Pennyroyal oil, which has a longer and more lethal track record than either of those, has not received the same treatment. Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern biological taxonomy, listed pennyroyal as an abortion-inducing substance in his 1749 work, Materia Medica. That means the scientific community has formally recognized this plant's capacity to cause serious harm for close to 300 years. Nearly every documented death from pennyroyal poisoning has involved someone who ingested the concentrated essential oil, very often while attempting to end a pregnancy, unaware that the oil does not reliably do what folk tradition claims it does. What it does reliably is poison the liver. And that gets to the part of this story that sits closest to the niche this channel covers: the backyard, the garden bed, the patch of wild herbs growing along a fence line. European pennyroyal is classified as invasive in several parts of North America. It escaped from colonial gardens centuries ago and established itself along waterways and wetlands, doing what mint family plants do best: spreading. American pennyroyal still grows wild in the limestone-rich woodlands of the eastern United States and Canada, producing small lavender blue flowers every summer and attracting pollinators the same way any mint does. If you have ever picked wild mint along a creek bed, or transplanted a patch of something minty from the edge of a neighbor's yard, or pulled up a low-growing herb that smelled right and dropped it into a tea ball without a second thought, this next part is for you. For anyone who forages, grows herbs at home, or identifies wild plants for tea, this is the part that should land hardest. Pennyroyal looks like mint. It grows like mint. It smells like mint when you crush the leaf. A forager who does not know the specific differences between Mentha pulegium and Mentha piperita, between pennyroyal and peppermint, is separated from a serious mistake by a few subtle details. European pennyroyal creeps lower to the ground than most peppermint. Its leaves are smaller and rounder, with a slightly different texture. Its flowers cluster more tightly along the stem. The American species has a more upright habit and smaller, narrower leaves, but these are differences a trained eye catches, not a casual one. Not someone browsing a roadside ditch for wild mint to throw in a pitcher of iced tea. Some pet flea collars have historically contained pennyroyal oil or crushed pennyroyal leaves because the flea-repelling property that Pliny wrote about 2,000 years ago still works. People have tucked sprigs of the plant into pockets and along windowsills to ward off mosquitoes. These uses persist because the folk reputation of the plant is older, louder, and more emotionally convincing than any medical journal article, and because the word mint carries an assumption of safety that pennyroyal rides without earning. If you grow herbs at home and you have ever bought a packet of mint seeds from a swap meet or an online seller without checking the species name printed on the label, you might want to go look at that label now. What makes pennyroyal genuinely unusual in the world of toxic plants is that it is not a plant that was always understood to be dangerous. It is not hemlock, whose name alone carries a cultural warning. It is not belladonna, which looks sinister even to someone who has never read a word about it. Pennyroyal was the mint your grandmother trusted, the tea your community brewed when someone had a cold, the herb that sat next to basil in a kitchen garden and never gave anyone a single reason to worry for over 2,000 years until someone concentrated it. The real question isn't whether pennyroyal is dangerous. The medical literature answered that one a long time ago. The real question is, why a plant with at least 24 documented poisoning cases, a compound that the body metabolizes into an irreversible hepatotoxin, no known antidote, and a recorded history of fatal outcomes, still sits on a federal list of approved food flavorings, while the concentrated oil ships to consumers without a warning label? That gap between reputation and regulation is the space where the next case report gets written, and nobody has closed it. 2,000 years of use, 24 documented poisoning cases, 0 antidotes. 1 tablespoon. Pennyroyal is still growing. In gardens, along streams, at the edges of fields and the margins of hiking trails, in the cracks of old stone walls and the wet ditches beside country roads. And unless you know exactly what to look for, it looks, smells, and grows exactly like the mint you already trust.